David Brucey here, new episode of 3 for All. This is 3 Steve Vai Licks from 1988, and this episode's a continuation of the Playing with Feel series that I introduced back in August and September, and we bypassed that series the month of October for Metal Month, and then last month I had the Mick Goodrick, concepts and tribute, which was important, but I wanted to return to this series because I had some more ideas up my sleeve, and really playing with feel and emotion and this emotive energy and expression is where it's at. That's what all guitarists should be doing. And really, when you think about it, I mean, Steve Vai is one of the most expressive guitarists I can think of. I mean, if you really think about everything he's done with a guitar in his hands, we've heard him make a guitar talk, scream, growl like a tiger, meow like a cat. I mean, there's all sorts of things. We've heard him make his guitar laugh and all sorts of stuff. So very expressive and very unique and interesting, approaches. And really tapping into some of Vai's, expressive ideas is really beneficial, because it's going to open your eyes to maybe some different approaches or, different ways of playing notes or playing melodies and licks and phrases and stuff like that. So this is essential, but commonly overlooked. So here we go. So definitely in 1988, Steve Vai was on fire. I mean, his career was on the rise. It's post-Zappa, post-Flexible, post-Eat 'em and Smile, technically. 1988, that would have been Skyscraper era. And he hadn't released Passion and Warfare yet, so Steve Vai really hadn't exploded. By 1988, he was literally exploding and growing, in popularity and stuff like that. So a really exciting time in his career, and there was so much going on. And of course, everything changed once he left Roth's band and eventually released Passion and Warfare, started working with Whitesnake, and the next thing you knew, he was literally a bona fide guitar god. But this is that transition and growth period of Vai's career, which is so fascinating. The licks in this episode came from bootlegs from the 1988 Skyscraper tour, and I was looking for very specific things from Steve, and I wasn't worried about shredding and crazy licks and stuff, which he's known for that. But I was looking more for those emotive moments and really expressive, phrases. I love when Vai plays melodically and really, whips out these, different ideas. And, the first example is very basic, and the last example is really complicated and crazy. So I wanted to kind of show this kind of, extreme form of very simple ideas and phrasing, and then very complex phrasing, from Steve Vai. So here we go. But the first lick really isn't a lick, it's just a single note bend, but it's Steve Vai's 12-second bend. And when I saw this footage, immediately I thought, well, I'm gonna start with that, because it kind of reminded me of his Martian Love Secrets lessons and articles, they were in Guitar Player back in the day. That was like in the late 80s. And that was before the big, 10-hour guitar workout that was in Guitar World. But before that, in Guitar Player, he had a series of columns called Martian Love Secrets, and in that series, I think it was the second, lesson or article, but he was talking about playing a single note for an hour. And I know when I was a teenager and I read that article, I was like, one note for an hour? And I remember sitting in my room, trying it at least. I don't know if I ever actually made it to an hour. That's a very long time just sitting there nursing, one note. But I do remember playing with, that idea. So I wanted to start with this. So here's the clip of Steve Vai just bending one note, but he lets it sustain for 12 full seconds, or almost 12 seconds. But check this out. So before we attempt Steve Vai's 12-second sustained bend, I wanted to include this, and it's just kind of an edited transcript from Vai's article, from Martian Love Secrets, and he's explaining this, playing a note for an hour. So I'm going to let this run for about 10 seconds so you can actually read it. If it changes, or flips too fast, you can pause it for sure, but read, what he's saying right here. Okay, as far as the bend itself, he's really just grabbing an E and bending that a whole step to F sharp right here on the B string. Just bend that 17th fret up a whole step, and it's going to sound like the 19th fret. That E to F sharp right here. And let it sustain as long as you can. That's about 6 seconds right there, so like half as long as Vai held it. And the trick here is obviously, there's kind of an unfair advantage. I guarantee when Vi sound checked for that concert on that stage, he probably walked around and figured out where the sweet spots were on that stage. Sweet spots being, areas and certain distances, from his amp where certain notes would sustain and feed back, better than other places. And they typically mark, the stage with gaffer's tape, like X's, and that shows them exactly where to stand, where you can get that ideal, sustained sound, like that. Now, of course, I'm sitting beside my amp, and I'm not like full performance volume. I'm just I'm not really that loud right here. But, Vi's standing on a concert stage, full volume, full everything. So you definitely need some, distortion, maybe a little bit of reverb. You could use some compression if you wanted to. But the trick here is holding on to that note. Don't let go of it. And it seems like a lot of players, when they bend a note, they want to get rid of it. Like maybe it hurts their hand or it's hard. But you want to just, physically just grab that note, bend it, and hold on to it for dear life. And let it sustain as long as you can. That's really hard to do. No vibrato, just holding a note. So that's really tough. And this is kind of, a version of just playing a note for an hour. So obviously you're not going to sustain that one bend for an hour. The note's going to die at some point. Vi is somehow magically holding that note for 12 seconds while he's waving, the crowd along. But just experiment with that. Now, once you practice that bend, you can continue this one note for an hour idea. Honestly, you don't have to spend an entire hour playing one note unless you just want to. That's very disciplined, to sit there and practice like that. But you can take this concept, instead of doing a bend, you could just play, single notes, or you could slide or tap or whatever. So here's, E to F sharp bend. Like I said, you could play single notes, E to F sharp. Maybe bend behind the nut right there. You could slide into the, E to F sharp. Octave. Tapping notes. Whatever you want to do. But right there, we're grabbing that note and just experimenting, seeing what we can do to make that note just sustain and just ring for as long as possible. It's really tough, but play around with that. It's beneficial practice, and the next time you bend a note, you're going to feel that practice and that time you spent working on that single bend. It's something that kind of, filters over into your playing with other things. But, practicing one specific area like that, it really does spread to other areas in your playing. Just something to think about. Next up is kind of the next step of practicing this. Now we're going to play a single bend, but we're going to pick it around 20 times, or at least I counted 20 times. And in this footage, it's kind of grainy, it's VHS, like bootleg. So it's kind of hard to actually hear how many times Vi picks this note or this bend. I counted 20, so I just decided to say 20 times. But we're going to bend and pick the sustained note 20 times, like this. Something like that. So we're bending this G to A, and I'm literally sitting there counting how many times I played that. And he changes, like the rhythm as far as how he's picking it. Sometimes it's spaced out. Sometimes it's picked close together. But then you can also hear like vibrato on that note too. So you're going to bend that G to A and just very aggressively, shake the vibrato and continue picking that note, like I said, 20 times, like this. And at the end, he basically grabs this F sharp, bends it up a half step and back, grabs that E to F sharp, and then slides C to D at the end. Like that. I guess you could hammer on that C to D too. Something like that. But of course the meat and potatoes here is that bend, and that's very demanding. You're going to definitely feel it in your fret hand. You're probably going to chew up your, your calluses or your fingertips a little bit. So the important thing to take away here is just targeting one specific thing and then repeating and drilling it over and over and over like that. There we had one bent note, and I continued to pick it and sustain it, 20 times. And you could apply this concept to almost anything, sliding between notes and string skipping and scale sequences, tapping or whatever. You can just target one thing and then just drill it and repeat it over and over and over like this. Like that. And you could pick other notes, you don't necessarily have to bend. And like I said, you could try this with other things. Just drill something over and over and over. It's really beneficial practice. Okay, up next is kind of a signature lick from Steve Vai. It's this slip and slide kind of intervallic thing, like this. One more time. And it's really interesting. So it's basically based around, it's basically kind of hinting at F sharp 7, kind of Mixolydian kind of. We're starting with E. Almost like an E add 9 right there, because this E to that B note, and you're going to grab this F sharp, and then you're going to slide E to F sharp right there on the D string. And that's where you hear that kind of blurry, you hear the same note, but you hear that kind of blurry slide before it. Like that. I love doing that kind of move. And he does it again right here. Grab C sharp, grab this B, and then shift slide that into C sharp. Basically hear him grab this F sharp twice. He doesn't really slide it. And then grab the C sharp and slide that B to C sharp at the end. Like that. You could also add another slide right there like this. I kind of like that. And I know Vai does that too, so you can definitely add that E note if you don't want to just double that F sharp. You could also expand that an octave higher and do it way up here. Way up there. But I love those phrases from Vai where it's really unusual. You're hearing that blurry shift slide, and the note selection's interesting. Cool lick, and definitely a signature sound from Steve Vai. Here's a bonus lick from this footage, and it's very unusual, very weird. It's this smeared tap bending. You can definitely hear it from Steve Vai. Check out the Attitude song if you want to find more licks like this. It's very unusual, very unorthodox, but also very Steve Vai, like this. Something like that. It's really weird, so I'm going to break this down. So we're starting with this B note bent right here on the G string. And then you're going to basically tap this A note, but you're going to still have that note bent. So it's going to sound like a B because of that bend, but you're basically tapping A. And then you're going to release that bend, and then I'm just sliding my pick, my tapping hand there up a fret, like this. Like that. Really weird. And then you definitely hear this F sharp. Then you hear this F sharp here, and I'm hearing an E back here. Then you're hearing this C sharp, and you see him move up here and grab C. Which is really weird, like this. And then you hear B to C sharp. the first pass right here. So weird. And do the next pass, it starts the same. And then you're just going to basically tap this F sharp, hammer on E to F sharp down here with your fret hand. And then he basically does that B to C sharp again. I think he dips his bar with, for vibrato there. And then do it again. And he does this weird kind of tap slide right there. I'm not really sure what he's doing there. And you definitely hear the bar dip. And the last time, this is really weird. You're going to basically do the bent note, the tap, release the bent note, and then move that tap note up again like that. Grab that F sharp. After that tap note, then you're going to basically grab F sharp here, move your fret hand up, grab E, and then bend that E up to F sharp. Release to that C sharp like that. And then this is really hard. So you're going to basically grab this A, bend that up, and then you're going to tap this B note, which is going to sound like C sharp, which that's really hard to do to get it clean in there. That's such an unusual lick. It's so weird, but it's so cool. Something like that. You know, thanks Steve Vai for cramping my fingers up. Jeez. That's going to wrap this episode of 3 for All with 3 Steve Vai licks from 1988. You know, without question, a dynamic and expressive guitarist and one of my biggest influences. And I know initially it was Van Halen, but I didn't feel right jumping over to Steve Vai. You know, I felt like I was betraying Eddie. But then I discovered Joe Satriani, and he became that stepping stone because I went from Eddie to Joe. And then once I opened that door with Joe Satriani, I couldn't help but just dive into Steve Vai because it was right there. And then I had Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, and Eddie Van Halen. And that was the trifecta of my guitar playing, you know, my entire teenage years. And still, 3 of my biggest influences to this day. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.